getting really clear on what you're fearful of. So, for example, for me, I was super scared of just humiliating myself. I hated the feeling of spiking the throw 30 feet and then all my teammates and coaches looking at me like, Jesus, what the hell happened? And then like doing it again. And then they're like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like he has the yips bad. And then it just feels like everyone's watching you and, it just starts to spiral.
All right, we are live with another episode of the Mound Visit. Josh, how was your week?
My week was not too bad. I pitched on Wednesday. It was the kids' day over in Greensboro. So super loud, lots of energy, and the only bad thing was it was early in the day. So it wasn't too bad. I threw 1.1 innings, and the first inning I walked one, and then the next one it was a clean 1-3 inning. So it wasn't too bad. I'm still struggling a little bit with my velo, but I'm getting outs, and for right now, that's kind of what matters. And I'm just going to keep trying to work on my velo and trying to get that back up.
Yeah, I mean, when you're not feeling your best, right? Like I know you've talked about still trying to work through things with the back, making sure that's feeling good, and like that's the center of everything. When you're throwing, if the back's not feeling good, it's gonna be tough for the velo to be where it needs to be. But right, you're getting outs. I think I've been following your games. Like I don't want to jinx it, but you haven't given up a hit, I don't think, yet at this point. So like you're throwing well, you're finding a way to use your slider. You're really good off speed pitches, and then that fastball, I think you're still getting a lot of whiffs on it. I don't know what your miss rate is, but I feel like it's still playing up really well. So that's encouraging, right? Like, and this is a good message for pitchers that are listening is you're not always going to feel your best. You might go through phases where your stuff isn't as sharp. You don't feel as good physically, but you still have to compete and you still have to find a way to get outs with what you have. And you're doing a great job of that.
Yeah. And I think it's a little bit easier because I'm a reliever now. So then I only have to go out there for like an inning or two max. So it's a little bit easier to, work on stuff, and you don't have to be like perfect. I feel like when I was a starter, I felt like a little bit of pressure of, okay, like this day I need to be perfect. I can't be thinking about my mechanics or anything. I need to make sure I'm going 4 to 5 innings, 6 innings so that I don't kill the bullpen. But now as a reliever, it's the pressure's a little bit off. And so I can still work on things, and I can still work on my mechanics and my pitches, and not have it be such a big impact on my performance.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there is, like, you do feel a little added pressure as a starter in a way, because like you said, if you only go 2 innings or 3 innings, now the bullpen's got to cover the rest of the game. So there is a little bit of, added pressure to that versus the bullpen. You come in, you let it rip for as many outs as they let you get, and you kind of go from there. And on top of it, like if something is bothering you or isn't feeling great, like you can kind of fight through it for, an inning or whatever it is. But on the flip side, you do have to respond faster. Right? I mean, I know minor league baseball is a little bit different. Like you're not going back-to-back days and, in high A, I don't think, at least. But you're still maybe going every other day potentially, or you're hot at least 2 days later. So there is a little bit of that to where the volume's lower day to day, but the chronic workload could potentially be higher, which, might not give you enough time to recover. So it's like all those little details play into it and matter.
Yeah, for sure. That was a big adjustment. But I love our pitching coach. I love him. He just said, all right, relievers, like all you need to focus on is just throwing as hard as you can when you come out of the pen. I don't care if you're throwing balls or strikes. I just want you to throw it as hard as you can, because a lot of our relievers right now are converted starters. And so as you go up the minor league levels, I think you kind of get separated into, all right, this is kind of what you're going to be in the future. And so starters become relievers, and we only have 6 starters right now. So every one of our starters has their own day, and so everyone else becomes relievers. So a lot of us are converted starters, and so we're trying to adjust. And so he was like, you know what, like you're not a starter anymore. I just want you to go out there and just throw the crap out of the ball every time you go out.
That's a pretty freeing mindset or message to hear from your pitching coach, right? Because I know we've talked about this before, on the air or off the air, I can't remember which, to where sometimes coaches can put a little added pressure on players, with whether it's intentional or not, to where it can lock players up by the words they use and what they say to you. So having a pitching coach that gives you the freedom of like, hey, if you throw balls, you throw balls, but I want you to give it everything you have, leave it out there, let it rip. Like, that's an encouraging and freeing mindset that's going to allow you to hopefully play better, because you're going to be more loose. And going from a starter to reliever, it is an important lesson to learn that the mindset is completely different, right? Like, you're not pacing yourself for 5, 6, 7 innings. It's you give it everything you have for as many outs as you can. You don't have to worry about saving any pitches. If you want to come out there and you want to rip 6 straight sliders to start the day, there's no issue. You probably don't have to worry about facing them a second time. You can just let everything hang out and give it everything you got for, 5, 6 outs or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, for sure. It was just a very freeing thing for relievers, just so that we can focus on throwing hard and throwing our best stuff instead of worrying about throwing strikes. So, yeah, I think that's a great mentality. And I think it ties really well into our topic today, which is the yips, and how, trying to focus so much on throwing accurately and throwing strikes can really hurt you. And so that's kind of the topic I want to talk about today. Do you have any experience with the yips, Jared?
Real quick, everyone, I wanted to tell you about my summer training program in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's going to be running from May 27th until August 3rd for high school and college pitchers. We're going to be attacking all of your goals, including increasing velocity, improving command, and improving pitch shapes. You're not going to want to miss this. And to sweeten the deal, I am running a pricing special until May 1st for $1,200. Check out the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. I personally don't, at least not in a game setting, but I will say this. I am not good at throwing batting practice, and there's a number of coaches that will tell you that they do get yipped up a little bit throwing BP. There was something about it. I just don't have a lot of experience with it. I was never really asked to do it much, but a few times I did. For whatever reason, I really struggled with throwing strikes in batting practice. And I heard you talk about this on the Patrick Jones podcast, which, Patrick's a good friend of mine, and really enjoyed that episode that you guys just did. And you talked about how fear plays into the yips and how that is like the center of it. And when I was listening to you saying that on his podcast, I was thinking about my experiences of where I felt like I couldn't throw strikes in a BP setting. And you're exactly right. It originated from fear. I was worried about, what are the other coaches and players going to think, because I'm not throwing strikes and they're trying to get their work in. It was just centered around me worrying about what other people are thinking about me, and just fearing the result of that, even though it really wasn't a big deal at the end of the day. But that's where it stemmed from. So I'm really, interested in hearing your perspective of how fear ties into the yips and what your experiences were with that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just run through kind of my experience with the yips. So it really happened in 2019. I was in summer ball with the West Coast League. And so I was an incoming freshman, and I was playing in the West Coast League, and we were doing some PFPs. And PFPs, they're kind of tough for a pitcher. You're going from throwing max effort to you're catching a ball and you're throwing at like a lower intensity to the bases. If you're a pitcher, you know what I mean. It's kind of weird. And so when I was doing that, I couldn't do them very well. I was throwing the ball, like spraying it a little bit. I was sailing the guys. I was spiking it. And so that kind of got in my head. But at that time, I could still play catch. I could still throw bullpens. I could still play in games. It got worse when I signed professionally a couple months later. And so now I have this pressure of, okay, I'm a professional baseball player. Like, I need to be able to do like the simple things well, PFPs, play catch, and everything like that. And there was just a lot of built up fear and anxiety. And so the first couple of days when I reported to Clearwater, Florida with the Phillies, I was feeling myself just be really nervous about doing PFPs and like a lot of anxiety about it. And sure enough, we would do them and they were just terrible. I would throw them, like spike it like 30 feet in front of me, or like sail it way past the fielders. And that really got in my head. I was like, damn, like that's not good. And so I would try to fix it in my catch play. And when I would do catch play, I'd be thinking about it. And it started to come into my catch play as well, to where I was getting really nervous about playing catch and like getting a lot of anxiety. And it got to the point where I couldn't even play catch. I wouldn't be able to hit my throwing partner. Like, I wouldn't throw it anywhere close to him. It was like, it would either just sail way past him or it would just spike. And it got to the point where I was like, to the pitching coach, I was like, I can't play catch anymore. And so instead of doing a throwing program, I would just throw into the net. And the weird thing was, though, when I was throwing max effort, I could throw accurately. And so I could throw bullpens and I could still play in games. In 2019, you can check my stats. It wasn't like terrible. I could still play and compete, which was weird. But I couldn't play catch or do PFPs. Any kind of lower effort throwing, it was a complete spike or a sail over my throwing partner. And so that kind of continued 2019, 2020. And in 2021, so during those years, I was kind of just like masking it. I could still play. So I was like, like catch play, I would just kind of like flick it or like do what I could to just get through it. But I still had like the yips and I still couldn't really play catch properly. What I was doing then was I just flick it until I was about, 90 feet. I'll literally just do like elbow tosses like this, just until I was at like 90 feet. And then when I was at 90 feet, I'll just start ripping it, like max effort. And so I was kind of able to get through it a little bit. But during a live BP session in 2021, early 2021, it might have been late 2020 actually, I had just come off 2 weeks off of quarantine in Sydney, Australia because of COVID. And so they required everyone who was in the country to stay at a hotel for 2 weeks. And so I wasn't able to throw that whole time. I come out and I throw for, like a week, and then I get into a game. And because of that 2 weeks quarantine, I wasn't feeling too great, but I was like, yeah, it's all right. Like, I'm still going to go throw. At that time, I was throwing really hard. I was like, 95 plus consistently. And so I get into this game, and then I'm throwing really hard, but I'm kind of spraying it a little bit. And it's fine. But then a right-handed hitter steps in the box, and I throw it as hard as I can. And I look up, and he's just like on the ground, just squirming in pain. And what had happened was I drilled him in the head at 95. And that caused a big thing, like the ambulance had to come, and, he was fine in the end, but it left in my mind, it was like a big, like kind of trauma thing where I was like, damn, like, I was like super scared. I felt awful, like I was like, damn, I really don't want to do that again. And so every other right-handed hitter that steps in the box, I would try to throw it away from him so that I wouldn't drill him. And because that was my mentality of, I'm going to throw it away from him instead of, I'm going to throw strikes, I started to spike it like way into the left-handed hitter's box because, I was just terrified of hitting the right-handed hitter. And so that kind of spiraled. And then even in bullpens, I wasn't able to throw strikes. It was just spikes into the left-handed hitter's box because, subconsciously I had that trauma of, I don't want to throw it into the right-handed hitter's box, so I'm going to try to throw it away. And so, yeah, it came into my my bullpens and my games, and now I can't even throw accurately when I'm throwing max effort. So in 2021, I couldn't do PFPs, I couldn't play catch, and I also couldn't throw off the mound. And so that's kind of where my journey really started of, all right, I got to do something about this, or, like my career is going to be done because I literally can't even play. And so should I get into everything that I did to overcome it, or do you have any questions on that, Jared?
Yeah, no, I'll just make a couple of comments, but that's a lot, right? Like that is a severe progression of starting off with something small of PFPs, transitions to catch play, and then eventually to the game. Did you, I mean, so this is a golf thing, but like the shanks, have you ever heard of the shanks in golf?
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah. So basically where you hit the ball like on the hosel of the golf club and the ball just shoots straight left if you're left-handed or straight right if you're right-handed. It's basically the yips version of golf. And oftentimes when guys do that in golf, they do that for the first time. It starts to get in their head. And I actually did this for a little bit. It's not a very fun feeling. But what I noticed was ever since that happened once, it would subconsciously like be in my mind that I might do it again. And if I didn't, it like felt like a sigh of relief, like a miracle that it was a normal shot and that I didn't actually shank it. When this started for you in catch play with, or sorry, not catch play, when it started with PFPs and then catch play and then the game, did you have fear of it happening in a game before it actually did happen in a game because of catch play and PFPs, or did it only affect you mentally in those specific settings?
You know, at the time, it was so bad to where it almost became, obviously, yeah, I had the negative mindset of like, oh, I don't want to do this in a game. And like, I would just be thinking about it all day. Like, Jesus, I don't want to humiliate myself and embarrass myself by just like spiking at 30 feet, because it's a terrible feeling. Like, you just like, your muscles are tense and you try to throw it and then it just spikes to your left, like 30 feet. And like, everyone's just like, what the hell just happened? You know?
Yeah.
But honestly, it kind of became like a muscle memory thing where like, that's kind of what my body started to do, was just, it would just spike the ball. It got to that point where it's like, even I still remember this. I would lie down and I would flick the ball up like this. And usually, you know, you can like just like flick it up and down, up and down. But at that time, I couldn't even do that. It would just like come out of my hand and it would just go like straight.
Wow.
You know, so I'll be trying to throw it up and then it would just like go completely opposite direction. And so it was like nearly muscle memory in my forearm of like, all right, we don't want to sail it. We don't want to like sail it, because that was like what the trauma was. Because if I sail it, then I might hit the right-handed hitter. So we're just going to spike it. And it kind of like, it almost felt like it was just, that's how I threw now. And so that's kind of where it really got to. And it was like, that was at my lowest low for sure.
Yeah. I coached a kid a couple years ago that had the yips, and it was really, really severe. And it was unfortunate. He was a very good pitcher. He had a lot of prior success. And truthfully, I don't know how it originally started. I think it started before I actually started working with him. But it's a tough place to be as a coach to know what to do for that person, because, you know, I can say everything I want to say. I can try to instill confidence in you. But if the player doesn't tackle that fear themselves and doesn't get to the root cause, doesn't really matter what a coach says or does. What was your experience with your coaches, you know, around you, or the sports psychologist group? Like, what were they having you do? What were they saying to you during this process?
Yeah, I was really lucky in that aspect, because I was in professional baseball and this was my first year. So they honestly just told me, hey, like, you know, you've got time. You're 18 years old. We invested in you, and like, there's no rush to try to overcome it. There's no rush to be able to have to compete at affiliate ball in a couple months or anything. It's like, all right, you have time. Let's just figure it out. And so they actually put me in rehab, which was massive, I think, because I was in rehab. And so I basically was in there with like a mental injury. And so that's kind of like how I like to look at it, as in, you know, it's tough to classify the yips as an injury because your body doesn't hurt most of the time. Like, your body doesn't hurt, and like, you're able to throw normally if you're just throwing into a net. But when there are people around you, then things change, and like, you start like spiking it and sailing it. And so it's really hard to classify it as an injury, but I really like it to where if you can classify it as an injury, then you can come up with a plan and a progression to be able to get over it.
Yeah. So let's dive into it then, because obviously we're a few years out from this. and you have made tremendous progress. And, knock on wood, I don't think it's an issue at this point. So what was your progression like from day one when you went on the injured list to today? Even what are some of the things that you've done?
Yeah, for sure. So one of my big breakthroughs was when I actually started working with Rachel Balkovec. She is the right now she's pretty big time. She's like the farm director for the Marlins right now. But at the time, she was a hitting coach with the Yankees, and she had come down to coach the professional team for Sydney. And at that time, I was during that offseason, I was a part of that team, and that was when my yips were the worst. And so we connected there, and I started working with her. And she introduced me to the concept of, okay, like the yips are an injury. She had experience with the yips during college. She was a catcher, and I'm pretty sure it ended her career because she couldn't throw back to the pitcher, and the college coaches was like, all right, like we can't deal with this, and so you're just going to be benched. And it kind of derailed her career. But ultimately, now she can throw BP, which is, like one of the harder things to do if you're yipped up. And so she kind of overcame it. And so she was mentoring me throughout that process. And her big thing was, okay, we need to have a throwing progression and also a mental progression. And so I'll cover the mental stuff first. For the mental stuff, it was basically, as we talked about, the yips, in my opinion, it's rooted in fear and anxiety. So you're so fearful of making a bad throw, or like embarrassing yourself, humiliating yourself, and you have so much anxiety around it that your muscle just start to tense, and the muscles around your forearm and your hand, they start to tense because of all that anxiety, and you're not able to throw freely. And so the first step was, recognizing that fact of, okay, I'm really scared of throwing. And then the next step was, how can we attack that fear? And this is a kind of a long process, but if I were to summarize it, it's getting really clear on what you're fearful of. So, for example, for me, I was super scared of just humiliating myself. I hated the feeling of spiking the throw 30 feet and then all my teammates and coaches looking at me like, Jesus, what the hell happened? And then like doing it again, and then they're like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like he has the yips bad. And then it just feels like everyone's watching you, and it just starts to spiral. I was terrified of that. I was also terrified of disappointing the people who had invested in me and believed in me. So like the Philadelphia Phillies had invested in me. They had put a little bit of money behind me. And so I was scared of disappointing those scouts and the front office people that had made that decision. And so those were kind of like the two things that I was super scared of. And so I had to really dig into why I was scared of those things. I was like, okay, I'm scared of humiliating myself. Why? And then it goes down a big rabbit hole of, I don't want to get into like the evolutionary psychology of like back in the day, we were all in a tribe. And so if people were rejecting you, then they would they would go and kill you and stuff like that. But there's a lot of stuff behind it. But it was basically, it came down to, I just cared way too much about what other people thought of me. And that was like what was causing my fear and anxiety. And so that was what the root cause was. And that was what I had to start attacking.
Where do you think that stemmed from? Because I think most people deal with that. Like I would say, I do personally, is worrying about what other people think. And I know we've talked about this on a previous podcast about the spotlight effect, but do you think that there is some validity to it? Because, when we do, if someone has the yips or someone does something crazy out there, like people are noticing it, right? Like it's not like people are just, blinded by it and they don't see it. So there's a reason why you're feeling what you're feeling. But what do you think what do you think is the root cause of that for most people? Like, why do we feel that? Is it just because we want to be accepted and we obviously don't want to be an outsider, made fun of, all those types of things? Or like, is there something else that I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, no, I think that's mostly it. It's just like a very natural thing for humans to be like, to try to want like acceptance and validation from others. And it's a terrible feeling to be humiliated and like embarrassed and stuff like that. And so it's a very natural thing. But with the yips, it gets to the point where you're wanting validation and you're worried about that more than you want to make a good throw. And so like sometimes thinking back, I would be like, oh damn, like I'm thinking about like all my other teammates before I'm trying to make a throw and how they're going to make fun of me before I'm actually trying to make a throw. And so that's where you kind of have to rewire your brain to be like, like you kind of have to go on the extreme opposite side of, all right, I don't care what anyone thinks of me. I'm just going to make this throw. And so that's kind of what I had to do to rewire my brain.
Okay, so dive into that. You got to the root cause. You figured out where the fear is stemming from. That's a great first step, right? Now, what did you do with it? How did you take the next step to basically get that out of your head and for that to not be a fear anymore? What was the next step?
Yeah. So this is the biggest step for getting over the yips. I do want to touch on one thing, which is people with the yips, they look for like shortcuts and like quick fixes. And so they're thinking like, all right, like they're thinking more like mechanical, like, oh, if I get my arm here, then I'll be able to make a good throw. Or like, oh, if I stay close for a little bit longer, then I'll make a good throw. And that's more very, very temporary fixes. Once your body gets used to it and it's not distracted by the mechanical cue, then it's going to come back to the yips are going to come back. And so you really have to dive into like the mental stuff. And this was the biggest thing for me in getting over it, was to not care what other people think. And so what did I do for this? The big thing that I did was really, I think 2 or 3 things, biggest things. So the first thing was I would read a lot of books on how to not care. And so the biggest one was David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me. Another one was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And there were a couple ones, but those were 2 big ones. Oh, also Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's all about growth mindset. And so reading those books really started to open my perspective on, okay, like you got to stop caring so much about what other people think. For example, with the David Goggins book, he talks about, he kind of talks all about that. It was like, like stop caring about what other people think. You just got to do you type thing. And the subtle art is more philosophical, where it's like, everyone's going to die. And so like, you can't be thinking about what other people think because, like in 100 years, everyone you're thinking about is going to be dead. And so stop placing so much importance on what other people think of you. And like the growth mindset stuff, it was the growth mindset stuff was more about like you can improve. Like failing is a good thing, and trying to improve is more important than being outcome driven. And so, for example, with throwing, so instead of like thinking about, oh, if I make a bad throw, this is going to be bad, it's more like, all right, I'm going to make a bad throw, but I can improve day by day. And that was kind of like the mentality that it preached. And that really helped as well. So a lot of reading on like psychology and like how to not care as much, that really helped because it just gives you like so many more ideas and perspectives. And it just opens your mind to like, oh, damn, like I never thought about this before. Another thing that's more of a practical one was making bad throws on purpose. And so I got this from a Japanese book, but it's basically you make bad throws on purpose, and then you kind of analyze the situation. So you make a bad throw, you just sail it, or you spike it on purpose, and you're like, and you just analyze it. And you're like, was that bad? Was it that scary to do that? And most of the time, it really isn't that big of a deal. Like you make a bad throw, and like no one really cares. And so doing that on purpose um, opens up your mind to be like, damn, that really wasn't too bad. Like, I don't know why I'm so scared of that. It's not like the biggest deal in the world to make a bad throw. And so those were kind of the two things that I did. And you need to do them consistently, though. You can't just do them, like once or twice. This is kind of like you have to rewire your brain to start to think like that. And this takes time. It probably takes, a couple months to be able to do that. But those two things were the biggest two things for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have anything on that?
No, yeah. A couple things that stood out to me. The first one is the mechanical side of things. I've experienced this too with guys that have had the yips that I've worked with. They tend to think that it is mechanical based. And to a degree, they are right. But the reason why that's probably not the area you should focus on is because your mindset and your mentality and all that are helping to dictate what your delivery is looking like. So I'll give you an example. Guy that I worked with, I was struggling with this. When he was really at his worst with the yips, his delivery was super, super pushy. Like everything, he was underneath the ball. He would collapse his back leg. Like there was no power or drive from the front leg like he has when he normally throws. So if we look at the delivery, we'd be like, okay, yeah, there's a clear mechanical issue here. But the reason that he was doing that was because he had such a timid and fearful mindset that actually changed his mechanics and made him get pushy, not be aggressive, get on top of the ball, all those things. So until we actually attacked the mental side, the delivery was going to revert back to that pushiness because that was reflecting what his mentality was. So I really like how you talked about that. The second thing, which is funny because you did talk about it on Patrick's podcast too, about the intentionally throwing the ball poorly, which I thought was funny, especially if you were throwing with someone you didn't tell them that you were going to do. It's just kind of a funny thing to think about. But what I think is cool about that too, and maybe I'm wrong with this, but just thinking about it as you're saying it, by the fact that you're telling yourself to make a bad throw on purpose and that you actually do make a bad throw, you're essentially starting to program yourself to tell yourself that I actually do have control and command over what I'm doing with this baseball. I am intentionally wanting to make a bad throw and I am making a bad throw. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it is a similar mindset of like when I'm trying to throw the ball where I want to throw it. If I'm trying to throw this down and away and I can do it, it builds confidence in me that I actually do have control over what the baseball is doing. And regardless that it's, in a direction that isn't what we want in a game, the fact that you're still throwing it where you are intending to throw it, I think is a really good way to start to build the confidence in your mind. Have you thought about it from that side of things as well?
About the making the bad throws?
Yeah. Have you ever thought of it in the lens of like, it's a way of building confidence because you are actually doing what you're wanting to do with the baseball in a way?
Oh yeah, for sure. That was a big thing for me as well. It was like especially when you're sailing it, your arm moves freely because if you're like, all right, I'm just gonna sail it like way over my throwing partner, and you actually do it, like it feels really good if you have the yips, because when you're trying to throw to like a target to your throwing partner, your muscles just feel really tense, and you're just like, and it just seems like impossible to hit that target. But when you're like, all right, I'm just gonna throw it into open air, like above him, then you're like, you can kind of feel your arm just free up, and like it can move freely. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me as well. It was just like, all right, like my arm actually does move fine when I'm not trying to throw like at a pinpoint target.
For sure. Okay. So you start doing that. You start making bad throws on purpose. What's the next step? What did you do next?
All right. So we kind of skipped a couple steps there, actually. So I'll quickly talk about like the throwing program that I did. This was the Yips rehab throwing program. And this is what I did with Rachel. And so there's a couple steps to this. The first step, when you have the yips really bad and you can't even play catch, and you're just spiking and sailing it, you want to get into a enclosed environment, so like a batting cage or like a indoor environment where you literally can't throw, like you're not aiming anywhere type thing. So like you just have a net and you're just going to be throwing into it. And so the first step is to set up a target on the net, and then without anyone watching, you don't want anyone there. Maybe someone that you like trust, or like a coach or whatever can be there, but you want the least amount of pressure as possible, and you want to start to throw at that target. And the big thing here is that you need to come up with a solid cue that lets you hit that target about 7 to 8 times out of 10. And that cue has to be, from what I found, it has to be something with your release. And so for me, it was, I'm going to throw it, but I'm going to slightly cut the ball a little bit. So as soon as I'm throwing, I'm feeling the ball kind of come off my index finger, and it's cutting a little bit. And what that does is, cues before the release are good, but I feel like with the yips, it's a big like hand and forearm thing. So I like cues closer to release than, for example, I'm going to stay closed and then I'm going to throw, because ultimately the yips are caused when you release, and it happens when like all your muscles in your forearms and hands tense. And so I like cues that are more like release based. So, all right, I want to feel this off my fingertips. I want to feel this when I release the ball. And so, yeah, the first step is coming up with a release based cue that allows you to hit the target like 7 to 8 times out of 10. And this might take you, like a couple days. It might take you a month. But you really want to find a solid cue that you're repeating every time you throw. For me, it was, I'm trying to cut it a little bit. So every time I'm throwing, making a throw to the target, I'm going, all right, I'm feeling this come off my index finger, and I'm cutting it a little bit. So I make my throw. Boom. I hit the target. All right, next one. I'm feeling it, cut the ball. Boom, again. And so you want to do that, and you want to stack, 3 to 5 sessions of really good throwing sessions where you're hitting it 7 to 8 times out of 10. And when you're able to do that, then you can move on to the next step. What do you think about that?
I like it. And it actually makes sense when you started talking about being in an enclosed area like a batting cage, because for me, I actually can throw BP really well in a batting cage. But when I'm on a field with the open space, that's when my command issues start to get bad with batting practice.
Yeah, for sure. The big thing is, first step, it has to be enclosed. It has to be a net where you literally can't miss, because you don't want any type of pressure. This is step 1. This is rehab exercise number 1. And so you want the least amount of pressure possible, and you're just throwing into a net with a target. All right, so next step, when you're able to do that, you want to move on to a person standing in front of the net. And so you're doing the same thing, enclosed area. You can't, like, no open fields. That was absolutely terrifying for me when I had it. It has to be an enclosed area, batting cage, whatever. But now all you have is a person standing in front. And so you do the same thing. So you've got your cue now. So now all you're focusing on is the release-based cue, and you're throwing it to a person. So, all right, I'm going to try to cut the ball a tiny bit, and then you throw it. And then if you make a really bad throw, then you take the person away, and you just do it to the net. And then you throw it back, you throw it into the net, and then when that starts getting good, you can bring back the person. And then you throw it to a person. And you kind of just alternate, until you're able to make, like the 7 to 8 good throws out of 10 with a person standing in front of a net.
Perfect. I like it. Keep going. I'm just going to keep feeding you. I'm following along and taking mental notes right now. So what's next?
All right, for sure. The next step, this one's probably the hardest one, is you got to start playing catch. And so the big thing is the cue. And why I place so much of an importance with the cue is that, like the people with the yips, they can throw freely. Most of the time you can throw freely into a net. You're just like, oh, I can throw freely. And then you're like, but I don't know what happens when I go play catch. Like something happens. And so we kind of want to bridge that. And so if you're throwing into a net with a solid cue, you're like, all right, if I follow this cue, then I know then it's going to go somewhere near that area. And you kind of build that belief to where, all right, this cue, if I rely on it, then I'll be fine. And so you really need that. So because when you go play catch, most of the time, the yips are going to come back a little bit. But the biggest thing is relying on that cue. And so even if you're like feeling nervous, you're feeling anxiety, you're feeling fear, you're like, all right, as long as I follow this cue, I know that I can throw it remotely accurately. And so all I'm going to focus on is my cue. And so you're playing catch. And for me, it was just, sometimes I would just even close my eyes and be like, all right, like I'm just going to focus on my cue and just like throw it. And it's like, I'm just going to cut it a little bit and I'll be throwing it. And so, the biggest step here is like, you're playing catch, you focus on your cue, and you're focusing on not caring what your catch partner thinks of you. Those are the big two things: cue and not caring what the other person thinks of you. And this is a gradual process. With the reading, try to get like a lot of ideas and perspectives into your mind about you can't care about other people think. Read up on the spotlight effect. I love that. And so this one's going to take the most time, playing catch. But if you can get this one down, then the rest of it's going to be a breeze.
Who is your partner for this? Is it a coach or is it a player at this point?
Someone who you can, someone who doesn't really care if you make a ton of bad throws. Probably going to be like a friend. One thing that I forgot to add was that make sure it's outside of a team environment. You want it to be someone, you want to play catch alone. And so it's you and your throwing partner, and that's it. You don't want to be in a team environment because you don't want to have that pressure of, oh, people are watching me and I don't want to make a bad throw because it's going to be embarrassing. For this step, it has to be you're playing catch alone. So maybe go to practice a little bit early and then be like, hey, like, can I just play catch a little bit early, or stay behind a little bit later and be like, hey, I just want to play catch by myself. And that's huge because all you want to be focusing on is your cue and trying to not care as much about what your throwing partner thinks. And you don't want like the external pressures of, oh, people are looking at me for this step.
Okay, makes sense. So once you start accomplishing that and that's good, what would be the next step? Is it then now playing catch in a team setting, or what comes after that?
Yeah, so it would be playing catch in a team setting. This one is a little bit tough, but it's the same kind of concept as just playing catch. You want to really focus on your cue and just continue to work on your ability to not care as much about making a bad throw and what other people think of you. The hardest thing for me was like I was in spring training and, there's a ton of people there. And so we're lined up and we're playing catch and everyone's so close together. And so that was really tough for me. But the biggest thing for me right there was like, instead of thinking about, all right, like I can't make a bad throw, it's just I have to focus on my cue. And just believing that as long as I follow that cue, it's going to be somewhere near my throwing partner where he can catch the ball.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So after that, is it now bullpen time, or what is next after playing catch in a team setting?
Yeah, I think if you can play catch in a team setting, it's pretty much getting a pen and then just continuing to get better at those skills of just being able to focus on your cues and more and not caring as much about what other people think and developing that muscle. And honestly, like at that point, you're probably if you're able to play catch in a team environment, then you're probably pretty good to go through pans and maybe into games. But yeah, at that point, you're pretty much like done with the process, I would say.
Okay. So how long did this take for you? Like from start to finish of going into the rehab process to being pitching in game, not just pitching in game, but actually feeling like your normal self to where you have confidence that the ball is going to go generally where you want it to go?
Yeah, I think it took me probably like a full year, that process. But I think it took so long because I was searching for shortcuts at the start. I was thinking about, the mechanics, like, oh, I just need to do this and it'll be fine. And they'll be fine for one day and then it'll just come right back the next day. And so if I had really focused on, I need to get my mentality right from the start, then I think it would have been much, much quicker. But the one thing I will say is that the yips never really like cure. They never really just like go away. They're always going to it's always going to linger in your mind. You just get better at suppressing it and throwing through it. Like even now, like I don't really get nervous playing catch or anything like that. But if I make a bad throw, then I do get a little bit of like that, that anxiety, fear type thing. And I have to really remind myself of like, okay, it's not a big deal. So it's never going to go away, but you just get better at being able to suppress it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thought I just had was you were traded from the Phillies to the Rangers. Were you traded in the middle of this process, or were you traded after this was all good?
At that time, I had pretty much finished my. I was pretty good at that time. I was able to play catch. I was able to play in games, but I was definitely feeling super nervous. And when I got traded, I did feel very nervous about, being with a new team, and I didn't want to, like for it to come back up because it's a fresh team and like new people, and all of them are watching me because it's like, oh, this guy just got traded and he's coming to our team. But honestly, I think it helped because it was a fresh start, and at that time I was pretty good at playing catch and I could throw bullpens and playing games, and so no one had that thought of, oh, this guy had the yips or has the yips. It was more just like, oh, this is just a new guy and he looks fine because he can play catch and throw bullpens and playing games and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's kind of like you could see it from both sides of the coin. It's a good thing because it's a fresh start. No one really knows anything about you at this point. But on the flip side is you want to make a good impression right away, and you don't want to, have something come back up like the yips. And now like, wait, we just traded for this guy and he's got the yips. Like, what do we do now? So that makes a lot of sense. I want to dive into maybe some of your inspirations. I don't know if you have anybody that you looked up to that has overcome this process. I know Daniel Bard stands out. He's a guy that had the yips, was out of baseball for a while, ended up making it back to the big leagues, and I think was comeback player of the year with Colorado a couple years ago, and has been, a really good relief pitcher. There's also been guys like Rick Ankiel, who he didn't overcome it. I know we talked about that. He never overcame it on the mound, but he made a comeback as a position player and playing the big leagues as an outfielder for a couple years. But who are some guys that you have either talked to or are just familiar with their story that's been a help to you during this process?
Yeah, for sure. I think the two big one was Daniel Bard for sure, because he was like the big profile guy. but also Tyler Matzek as well. Both of them have great stories. Like Tyler Matzek really inspired me because I would watch his interviews and he kind of described what I had, which was I couldn't even play catch. I would just keep spiking it. But then I see him go on in the postseason and come out in big leverage situations and pump, 95 plus and, throwing strikes and striking the side out and stuff like that. So he was a huge inspiration. And also Daniel Bard, just seeing him come back and seeing that it's actually possible, because when you have the yips, it just feels like, oh, I just don't know if I'd ever be able to throw properly ever again. And you kind of lose hope. And so those two guys did give me hope and the belief that, okay, this is possible and it is possible to come back and pitch at a very high level. And Rick Keel, he was awesome because he came back as a hitter, but I couldn't take too much away from him because he didn't come back to pitch. He wasn't able to regain his pitching abilities, and so I didn't take too much from him. But the other two guys, they had the yips as a pitcher and they made a comeback as a pitcher, and so those two guys really inspired me for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I also have a friend, Luke Haggerty. I don't know if you know Luke, or Luke. Was he still at X2 when you were there?
Yeah, but I never really worked with him or anything.
Okay, yeah. So I worked with Luke a good bit at the end of my playing career, and then helped out at his facility a little bit at X2. So he was a first rounder out of Ball State back in, I want to say 2003 by the Cubs. And he ended up having Tommy John like his first year of pro ball, came back and just could not throw the ball anywhere near where he wanted to. He got the yips, eventually got released. He went to indie ball, still had the yips, got released, and then stopped playing baseball. I don't know how many years it was. It was definitely a long time. Like I want to say 6 to 8 years, something like that, of not throwing a baseball and just kind of being bitter with the game. And then he started getting back into it as a coach in training players. And then he opened up a facility in Arizona called X2 Performance. And so you might know him, or other people might know him from seeing videos like back in 2015 or 16. He would post videos of him throwing indoors, just ripping 95 to 98 from the left side. He's a big guy too. He's like 6'5" or 6'6", lanky, just rips it from the left side. And he was like in his mid 30s at this point, throwing, mid to high 90s still in a bullpen. Ended up getting re-signed by the Cubs in what year was it? I want to say 2019 or 2020. Maybe it was 2021 at 37, 38 years old. Didn't make it back to, I think he ended up getting hurt again and ended up, calling it quits. But he overcame the yips, worked through a really long process for him, but really cool story. And he's a great guy. And honestly, he's one of the best pitching coaches that I know. I've learned a lot from him over the years. So I'd love to connect you guys. I think it'd be really good for you guys to talk about his experiences and your experiences to go through that. But yeah, he was just somebody that came to mind. A couple of things I want to add just before we wrap up. I know you mentioned with catch play early on, you really struggled from short distances. And I noticed this with a lot of guys, even if they don't, officially have the yips and it's not ever a big deal for them. I do notice a lot of guys really struggle playing catch from anything shorter than 60 feet. And something I think is really simple is just simply don't throw from 60 feet, because there's really no need for it, especially if you're doing a good warm up and you're throwing plyo balls before and you're actually having your arm, prepped before catch play. There's no reason you can't start, at least 60 feet, 60, 70 feet away. So that would be my advice for guys that tend to get very pushy or erratic from short distances. Just start your throwing session from a further distance and start throwing at a little bit higher intensity, assuming that you've already prepped yourself with some plyo balls. Because with plyos, what's nice is because you're throwing into a wall, you don't have to worry necessarily about where the ball is going. So it frees you up to throw, to get loose and all those things. And that way, when you go to the baseball, you can start at a further distance. I know you said that you sort of did that. You would start ripping them closer to 90 feet. Do you have anything to add to that on little tricks or little things? I know there's no shortcuts, but are there little things that guys can start adding to their routines that can help with this process?
Yeah, even now, I just like I kind of just elbow flick it until I'm at about, like 50, 45, 50 feet. And then I start throwing for real. I think one of the big things is like if it's something that you really want to work on, then you want to start with where you're comfortable. And then every day you want to inch a little bit closer to your throwing partner. And so that's kind of what I did. I wasn't comfortable throwing inside of 90 feet, but, that's kind of like unrealistic. When you're playing catch, it was kind of unhealthy for my arm to be going from elbow flicks to, all right, I'm ripping it 100% at 90 feet. And so what I did was, just every day I just kind of inched closer and then closer and closer. And as I exposed myself to it, then my body started to get used to it and my mind would get used to it as well. And so, that's what I would say.
Okay, perfect. Anything else to add or any other closing thoughts on the yips?
I think, when you have the yips, it's going to be like the toughest time of your baseball career and maybe even your life. When I was 18 and I had the yips, I know it was probably one of the hardest times of my life just because of what it was doing to me mentally. And I think one of the biggest things I would want to say is that the journey of trying to overcome the yips is worth it. It's not just, all right, I'm going to go and overcome the yips and I'm going to be able to throw again. It's more like you're self-improving yourself and you're improving your mentality, honestly, like in life, just like all that stuff that I did about, reading books and getting over my fears and managing my anxiety and stuff like that. It's gonna help me throughout my whole life. And so I think the biggest thing is just knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel and, not giving up and not losing hope and just really giving it a solid go on trying to overcome the yips.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Like at this point, it's more than just baseball, right? Like you're preparing yourself for the rest of your life. And these are tools that you're going to need. You're going to have to learn how to overcome things in your life and adversity and have a growth mindset to work through them. And, do you want to go through these things? Of course not. But the positive of it is you are showing yourself that you are a person that works through hard things and are able to overcome them. So coming back to what we've talked about in the past about David Goggins, the cookie jar, you're essentially building up your cookie jar of being able to show proof to yourself that you are someone that can overcome things. And regardless of failing at something, you're able to overcome it and push through it, regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, another great episode of the Mound Visit. We'll see you guys next week.